And going into this challenge, if you would call it a challenge, I was thinking Intel makes the best non-gaming GPUs, which sounds kind of funny to put it into sense. Is that Intel GPUs have things like video encoders on them that just outperform the likes of AMD and even go toe-to-toe with NVIDIA's competition, and in a lot of cases, it beats NVENC encoders. And then on top of that, compared to AMD, Intel graphics cards offered AI support on their first generation AI accelerators, but I am a changed man. The way that I looked at Intel GPUs 30 days ago is completely different to the way I look at them now. Because even in the price bracket where Intel's A750 and A770 sit in, a lot more competition has built up there since these graphics cards launched. Yet, Intel is still very competitive with its gaming performance. I'm going to be putting the $320 ARC A770 16GB graphics card up against AMD's RX 6700 non-XT, which goes for about $270. The RX 6700 isn't widely available. It's actually selling out right now, so I don't expect you guys to get your hands on this one, but the reason I'm comparing these two is because these are the closest price competitors that I have. Despite that though, when I reference Intel's GPUs for value, I'm actually talking about the ARC A750, not the 770 that I have here, because the ARC A750, according to Tech Power Up, is only about 7% behind the ARC A770, yet you can get this graphics card for $210 brand new compared to the A770 16GB at $320. At 1080p first, the A770 is only 5% behind the RX 6700 in Cyberpunk, a tiny bit ahead of the 6700 by just 1% in A Plague Tale Requiem, which I would like to say is an absolutely beautiful game, and the Steam Summer Sale has been treating me good this year. I don't know about you. And only 4% behind in Resident Evil 4. Yeah, like 1080p was pretty close, but at 1440p, the A770 is able to stretch its legs a little bit more. With the settings the exact same in these games except for changing the resolution, the A770 jumps from losing by 5% in Cyberpunk to winning by 6%. From just 1% faster to 8% faster in A Plague Tale Requiem. Also in Resident Evil 4, from losing at 1080p by 4% to tying the 6700 at 1440p. And just another little bonus, in Fortnite, the A770 destroyed the 6700 by 29% for some reason. The reason I think for this discrepancy why the 770 pulls ahead of the 6700 at 1440p is because of the memory bandwidth of these two GPUs. Intel's option has a 256-bit bus. Even Intel's cheaper A750 has a 256-bit bus, and this gives it the speed advantage. Even though the RX 6700 technically has 10 gigabytes of VRAM, it's only on a 160-bit bus, which slows down its memory. So as you increase in resolution and your GPU needs more data from the RAM, it can't keep up with it. It gets bottlenecked by its VRAM speed. And that's why it is cool to see from Intel, even on a $210 GPU, a 256-bit memory bus width, especially seeing from what NVIDIA is doing with the 4060, which has a 128-bit bus, the 4060 Ti at $400 having a 128-bit bus, and even what AMD is doing with the RX 7600, which also has a 128-bit bus, especially with 1080p decreasing in popularity according to the Steam hardware survey here, and 1440p growing month to month. Intel providing faster memory bandwidth than the competition at these price points does seem like they're looking towards the future with 1440p. Okay, that's really cool. A bunch of 1440p games. Intel does a little bit better than AMD in them. But what really separates Intel from AMD is the ray tracing performance. A Plague Tale Requiem only has ray trace shadows, but you can see even with that, the 770 is pulling 61% ahead of the 6700. And when you move over to Fortnite, the difference isn't as big, so this doesn't always apply when ray tracing is a thing. Using hardware ray tracing in Fortnite, the A770 is about 12% faster. But in Cyberpunk, you see a huge difference. Using the RT Ultra preset, this is a combination of the 6700 looking like it's running out of VRAM, and the fact that it doesn't handle ray tracing as well as a 770 does. But you know what's more beautiful than Cyberpunk? That's Minecraft. Okay. At 1440p with ray tracing at 12 chunks, the A770 pulls 45% ahead of the 6700. And I'm not going to sit here and like lie to say that like, oh, the ray tracing performance is so good that this is usable and you should play every game like this. No. I don't recommend using the ray tracing. It's not quite there yet on either GPU, but it's interesting to see how Intel on their first generation of ARC graphics cards is pulling ahead of AMD's first generation of their ray tracing on the 6700. Even for that matter, possibly even RDNA 3, so AMD's 7000 series ray tracing as well. Intel's gaming performance is really competitive, more competitive than many people probably are thinking it is right now. And in terms of features, Intel's GPUs seem to be way more forward-looking than AMD's competition. Honestly, like look me in the eyes when I say this. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Ray tracing is the future, and Intel's ray tracing just is beating AMD's right now. And the last like forward-looking feature that Intel has over AMD right now is their upscaler, XeSS. And I made a really in-depth video comparing XeSS to FSR to DLSS, so all of the major upscalers from these GPU brands. And what I found in that video, and I think many people would agree, maybe I had a little fumbles in it as well, XeSS in general looks better than FSR. And that's because XeSS uses deep learning. AMD's FSR doesn't use any GPU specific hardware. So you can use it on any GPU brand, it'll perform the same, but it also generally looks worse than XeSS and DLSS in every single case. And that's because AMD has taken that more open source approach to support it on every single GPU that exists. But that open source nature is FSR's downfall. Doesn't make anybody want to buy your GPUs. XeSS has an advantage. DLSS from NVIDIA, exclusive to their GPUs, has an advantage. And then FSR is just sitting there. It's like, we work on everything. Guys, we're the good guys, so support us. It doesn't make you want to buy their GPUs. It just makes you want to use their technology if you don't have any other option available. And this idea that people want to just use the best upscaling technology that their GPUs have is exacerbated by the recent drama that AMD has had where they're quote unquote possibly restricting competitors' upscaling technology in AMD sponsored titles. May or may not be true, but AMD looks pretty guilty at this moment. I think FSR and AMD's technology, it kind of has a short life ahead of it. It isn't the future, and it's clearly the worst option out of the three from all the companies. And that's why I think XeSS from Intel has a brighter future, and why a lot of Intel's features are more forward-looking than AMD. And over the past 30 days using an Intel Arc graphics card, I've been thinking about this a lot. Because the reason I'm comparing AMD so closely to Intel is because Intel only needs to compete with AMD if they want to get a foothold into this market. And that's because when NVIDIA is over 70% of the market share, a newcomer like Intel isn't just gonna pop in and then topple them off of their throne. And coming from a completely unbiased way, like I don't really care if AMD or Intel or NVIDIA wins when it comes down to it. All I want is good products, and seeing what Intel is doing, they're doing the right thing to put pressure on AMD and push this market forward. And AMD seems to be even behind Intel's first generation product on a lot of these things. But just because Intel's GPUs are all scrappy and they're fighting to take some market share away from AMD at this moment, that doesn't mean that this new energy is better or beats all of AMD as a company and their GPU's long experience. So Intel's Arc can struggle when it isn't the newest thing that's coming out right now, because Intel's GPUs are made for, say, graphics APIs like DirectX 12 and Vulkan. But when it comes down to other graphics APIs that are in a lot of games that a lot of us love, like DirectX 11 or DirectX 9, Intel's GPUs do struggle a little bit more, especially compared to AMD's offering. But Intel does seem to be catching up, and they're making a lot of progress. They keep putting out drivers and drivers. That's what I wanted to test. I wanted to test the words of all the reviewers that are saying that Intel is doing great with their driver updates. So what I did is I downloaded the earliest possible driver I could find on Intel's website on November 18th in 2022. So I could experience this for myself and show it to you guys instead of just believing what everybody says on the internet. Just to let you know, the blue percentage is the average, and then the yellow one is the 1% lows. And 1% lows are the average of basically your worst FPS. From the old driver to the new driver, you see that we only get about 6% on the average, but 27% on the 1% lows. The game is going to feel a lot smoother. Then in Overwatch 2, another DirectX 11 game, we get a 16% performance uplift on average and 79% for the 1% lows. Again, this is going to feel a lot smoother, and even in just these DirectX 11 titles, which aren't even that old, we're seeing huge improvements. But moving on to DirectX 9 with CSGO first here. Obviously, you know, the average isn't that bad. A 17% uplift, that's a decent improvement just from free software updates that Intel is providing. But the 1% lows at 113%, that is huge. What you might consider an unplayable state before, but Intel has made it good now. Moving on to Skyrim now. Before, this game really struggled. You can see the GPU is maxed out, getting like 80, 90 FPS here, but it gets to a very playable state. Average at 94% uplift and 1% lows at 61%. Also in Portal, the average is about the same. You can see it's maxing out my monitor's refresh rate. Portal has a built-in FPS cap to whatever your monitor is, so that's how that's set up. But then just slide over to the 1% lows with a casual almost 3000%. That's where I have to clarify, because this average 1% lows is taken from the entire run, not just one section. So most of the time the 1% lows were in the 80s, but because on this older driver it would have stutters pretty consistent, that does affect gameplay and you do feel it while you're playing. That's why the number is so drastic. So I think the reviewers are right, and Intel is making drastic improvements with their drivers, and there's still a lot of potential with these graphics cards, so we'll see when that potential is fully realized. And all of these driver improvements weren't just for game performance and stuff. They also go to help the general health of the Intel Arc ecosystem and the stability of the graphics cards in general. And you've probably been wondering, it's taken me this long, I spent 30 days with Intel Arc, how haven't you talked about all of the bugs and crashes you've experienced? You've probably had so many that even at 21 years old that you're getting gray hairs. What I have to say is that the experience has been really good and it's been super stress-free. That isn't to say though that Intel's GPUs are more stable than AMD's or Nvidia's. Like on an average basis, you have more problems with Intel Arc, but it isn't that much more that I'd say is concerning, especially for a first generation product only about 9 months into its life cycle. But that didn't mean that it didn't come without its problems, okay? I did experience quite a few, and I made sure to write down as many as I could throughout this 30-day challenge to keep you guys updated with this. And basically I could total up 7 issues. And just to name a few with games. So in Last of Us, the Intel Arc graphics card would randomly just crash sometimes when compiling shaders. But if I'm being honest with Last of Us and how buggy that game is in general, so that was kind of normal. Back when I started this, and even in my original video, I did mention that the second issue is Minecraft ray tracing. It would always crash, but now obviously I showed you Minecraft benchmarks. This is fixed, okay? I don't know what fixed it, but it works perfectly fine now. One other thing is I cannot launch Halo Infinite. This is the third issue. I'm not sure about this. Apparently what I've heard is that some updates fix Halo Infinite for Arc that are actually from Halo Infinite itself. That is to add that it just seems like Halo hates Intel GPUs in general, because if you go to the Halo Master Chief Collection, oh my god, that is a freaking mess. Do not play Master Chief Collection on Intel Arc at this very moment. And I have seen that some people will say, oh, you can use DXVK, which is DirectX to Vulkan converter, Intel's Arc graphics cards in Master Chief Collection, and have a better experience. But if I'm being honest, for the average person that just wants to hop in and play their games and not run through a bunch of hoops and troubleshooting, having to convert your game to Vulkan, it's just not a fluid experience, and most people aren't going to do that. Even if it does give you a decent experience, I don't think people are that desperate to play Halo Master Chief Collection. I'm just saying. Another one is in Overwatch 2. Every now and then I would get some major stutters in this game. Sometimes with those stutters, it would build up and then it would crash. But at the time I was using an Intel Arc beta driver. I'm not really blaming that on Intel Arc in general. I'm using a beta driver because I wanted to try out to see how stable the beta drivers were. In Cyberpunk, I'd have a relatively minor issue, but one that's really annoying, especially when you're benchmarking as much as I have recently. And this bug would make me have to restart the game. And that was whenever I went into to mess with the resolution from, I don't know, like 1440p to 1080p. It would just soft lock. I couldn't interact with the menus. It didn't happen on AMD or NVIDIA, so this is an ARC specific issue. And it's kind of just annoying, but pretty easy to fix in the grand scheme of things. So let's move into these last two bugs that I consistently ran into that affects my content creation process. Now, when I was editing my videos in DaVinci Resolve, but every now and then my computer would just kind of go black screen and lock up, and I would have to hard reset it by hitting the power button, which isn't always pleasant, especially when you're working on an important video project. So yeah. The other thing, and that's whenever you're under a heavy load when you're playing a game and you're trying to record it, the encoder on the GPU that is recording the game gets overloaded. And it doesn't happen in every single game, but it means that your footage looks choppy like this, and you don't want to see this in your recordings. And it makes things look, say like you're trying to track FPS in a game, it makes the game look choppy when, say, it was running at 60 FPS and it was smooth, but the recording makes the gameplay look worse than it actually was. And hopefully Intel's team can fix this, because this doesn't happen on AMD GPUs, this doesn't happen on NVIDIA GPUs. They put the level of processing for the encoder and recording footage above the game. It seems to be happening from what I can observe on the Intel Arc GPU. That I might be bandwidth limited, and I can't confirm or deny this, but I am on a PCIe Gen 3 system, and Intel's GPUs basically require a resizable bar to work properly, so that makes me think that they use as much of that bandwidth as possible. That's kind of what I have going through my head right now. And just let me know if you guys have experienced the same recording issues on Intel Arc GPUs. I'd love to know if you guys have fixed it, or if my theory is correct or incorrect. And that complicated issue that I just talked about is part of the reason why I need to just put it to you guys straight, is that I'm a heavy user on my computer, and these are the issues that I experience, and I'm someone who actually wrote down the issues that I had, and I did all of these benchmarks for games, all that kind of stuff. I edited tons of videos on it, I recorded tons of videos on it, I streamed on it multiple times, and these are the only issues that I experienced, which to me weren't that bad, because most of them were easily fixed. Also, the second thing is, these issues aren't really exclusive to Intel. Yeah, maybe I ran into more issues on an Intel GPU than AMD and NVIDIA. That's part of the PC gaming experience, to run into issues like this. So overall, this might surprise a lot of you guys, but the stability on Intel Arc GPU, especially 9 months after it launched, has been surprisingly good. And these 30 days have been relatively stress-free for me. However, though, even with all of this progress that Intel has made with their performance uplifts through drivers, or their ray tracing performance, their upscaling technology, their encoders, and their value keeps getting better and better for their price to performance. Even with all of these improvements from Intel, I do not blame people for not wanting to jump ship from AMD and NVIDIA and switch and buy Intel instead. Because when it comes down to it, and I hope a lot of people can see this as a consumer, Intel doesn't need your help. Intel is a multi-billion-dollar company, and they have the funding to make graphics cards. So they need to make a good product. Because at the end of the day, it's a confidence thing. And average consumers, just normal people, like buying a graphics card is an investment. Graphics cards are expensive, okay? Like, and I'm not joking. It is your time, your money, and you want a good experience. And I don't blame people for going with a brand that they trust, like AMD or NVIDIA. Even AMD is having trouble convincing people to get their graphics cards over NVIDIA, because AMD graphics cards are generally have better gaming performance than NVIDIA's competition for the price. But people are still only looking at NVIDIA as the reliable brand, and that's because NVIDIA has been around longer and been more reliable for longer than AMD. Even though nowadays they're extremely close, and if you gave me either an NVIDIA or an AMD GPU that performed the same, I don't really think I could tell a difference between the two. It might not even be that people are trusting AMD, but more that people are boycotting NVIDIA and their nasty business practices. And that's why I'm excited why Intel is here. And the reason why, kind of sad to say bye to this Intel Arc A770. It's extremely cool to see a company that is putting their best foot forward and a good effort into making graphics cards that are going to shake up the market. I know these graphics cards aren't perfect, they aren't the holy grail or anything, they aren't going to save us. And I know this Intel Arc A770 isn't the best value Arc card the A750 is. If I had that, I'd be testing that instead. If they continue to be more and more aggressive with the pricing like they are with the A750 right now, and they continue to make these software improvements, it's good for us, okay? That means for consumers that we're going to get better products and they're going to compete with AMD or NVIDIA. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what brand wins. It doesn't matter any of that crap. Okay, it's just good to see a third competitor in this market. And I've genuinely been very impressed with the experience on Arc so far. And I bet you're wondering, why are you taking out this GPU? If you like Intel Arc so much, why don't you just keep it? You know what I mean? Well, that's because this isn't my GPU. If you guys didn't see my first video, this GPU was lent to me by a viewer, and his name was Brian. So thank you again, Brian, for letting me borrow your card. It's been a great experience. This is basically Intel's top model graphics card, the best thing they have to offer at this point in time. Remember, Brian is a legend, and he allowed me to test this, get all these results. I made sure to grab as many benchmarks as I possibly could before I'm returning this thing. And with an experience like this, it tempts me to go get those crazy deals that are on the Arc A750 right now, because I think those are a solid option for a lot of people. Yeah, the other one will be 8GB, but I think it'll be pretty good even at that price point. But other than that, it's been 30 days and I guess it's time to go back to normal. So yeah, hopefully you guys have a good one. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and my experience on Intel Arc. See you guys in the next video. Peace.